So, I recently replayed almost every Assassin's Creed earlier this year, and I've come to realize that not every Assassin's Creed game is perfect. There's a lot of things in the series that are considered flaws, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad game. In fact, I don't really think there's a single bad Assassin's Creed game, maybe just a little underwhelming. So in this video, I want to go over one thing which I disliked from each of the mainline Assassin's Creed games. So without further ado, I'm just gonna jump right into it. So let's start with the game that launched the whole series, and that is Assassin's Creed 1. Now, if I was to choose one singular thing that I disliked from Assassin's Creed 1, it would definitely be the lackluster repetitive side content. The thing about Assassin's Creed 1 is that it was made all the way back in 2007, so it's a game that does not exactly hold up well in today's standards. Don't get me wrong, the story is pretty good. The graphics also for a 2007 game are pretty good too. However, there's a lot of things that are flaws that I could have mentioned for this game, but I just had to go with the side content. In fact, I made a video discussing why we need an Assassin's Creed 1 remake, and one of the points that I constantly kept talking about was how the lackluster side content was in that game. When it comes to the side quests, they mostly revolved around gathering flags or eliminating Templars, offering little variety or depth beyond that. And to make things worse, if you don't know the reason why side quests are even a thing in Assassin's Creed 1, well, you're about to know now. So, the child of the CEO of Ubisoft played Assassin's Creed 1 during the end of development, and that kid's response after playing it for a few hours was it was simply too boring. So, the developers added in side quests last minute, which is the reason why the side content felt a bit dull and repetitive in that game. Now for Assassin's Creed 2, a game that was a massive step up from Assassin's Creed 1 and introduced us to the most iconic assassin with Ezio Auditore. However, to pick one thing that I disliked from Assassin's Creed 2 was quite hard, as I thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish. But not every game is perfect, and if I was to pick one thing, it would definitely be those weird controls on PC. Now, I could be boring and say what everyone else has said, such as not being able to replay missions, but that really wasn't an issue to me, to be honest. The controls, however, oh boy. When I replayed the game earlier this year on PC, I forgot how bad it was. I don't know if it's the same for consoles, but for PC specifically, I was not a fan of what Ubisoft did with the game. Oftentimes when you point Ezio in one direction, he would go the complete opposite direction. Getting used to the controls took a lot of time, but eventually it was manageable. Seriously though, who came up with the idea of using the right mouse button as the default for running? I'm well aware that key bindings can be adjusted, but the menu itself was a bit weird looking, so eventually I just switched to controller and it felt a lot more comfortable, so I just abandoned keyboard and mouse altogether. Seriously though, whoever designed the controls for keyboard and mouse of that game for PC, you better hang your head in shame. Now for Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, my top 3 favourite games in the series. And just like Assassin's Creed 2, it's kind of hard to nitpick one specific thing that I disliked. At every turn, there was always something to do or discover in Brotherhood. Combine that with a pretty good narrative, compelling characters, and the game had an irresistible charm that felt like I was immersed in the world. But it must be done. The one issue I've picked out is that, in my opinion, the ending of the story felt a little rushed. You see, the period between Cesare's arrest and Ezio's confrontation with him in Spain spans approximately 5 years, and Ubisoft had the opportunity to include a few additional chapters depicting Ezio's hunt during that time. Unfortunately for me, the ending felt a bit rushed in a game that was pretty much a masterpiece. But now that I think about it, the fact that Ubisoft skipped over certain parts of the plot was crucial for them, because at that time they strongly valued historical accuracy, and the real world Cesare actually led armies during this time across Europe. For Ubisoft to somehow implement this into Brotherhood would be pretty impossible. It's a thing that cannot be done in one game, simply because of how much there was in that time gap. Of course, Ubisoft don't really care nowadays about historical accuracy, considering how crazy everything is in the RPG games. So yeah, that's probably the only issue that I had with Brotherhood. It's hard to say something so negative about a game that was pretty much the peak. Now it's time for Ezio's third game, and that is Assassin's Creed Revelations. Now I enjoyed this game quite a lot, even if it wasn't anything fresh or exciting. I do admit that it did need a fresh change though. But if I was to pick one thing that I disliked from this game, it would be the fact that all the side characters that we knew from the previous 2 Ezio games were just simply gone. Now it's kind of understandable considering we went all the way from Rome to Constantinople during the rise of the Ottoman Empire. So the characters cannot exactly come with us, but they didn't really make any appearances. It was a whole new city with new characters. I just personally would have liked to see characters that we knew from the previous games make a return and give us a nice ending story with them, but sadly they didn't. Revelations at the time of its release was considered not a good game by a lot of people back then, and I'll be honest. Slowly, the more we go further away from when it was released, I can slowly start to see why. It's not a bad game at all, it's just not exciting enough or fresh. It's more nostalgic than anything else. Now for Assassin's Creed 3, where we finally moved on from Ezio, but unfortunately to Connor. Now you can already see where my dislike is going to be focused on for this one. And yes, that is Connor himself. Now I know this is where the dislikes and hate comments may start to flood in, but this is purely my opinion. The issue lies with the fact that we went from Ezio, who's this charming, personality driven protagonist, to Connor, who's seen as boring and often reserved. I don't hate Connor at all. Hate is a strong word. I'd say I more so didn't bond with him well, and for a considerable portion of the game, he's just incredibly dull. I think the problem is that Ubisoft set us up for disappointment. In the opening hours of the game, we play as Haytham Kenway, who's Connor's father. Haytham is a much more lively and engaging character, even though he's a Templar. He's charming, witty and charismatic, and he's everything that Connor is not. Maybe if Ubisoft did not let us play as Haytham, my opinion and many others would change, but that's just a case of what if. Oh, and by the way, I believe that Haytham needs his own game. Assassin's Creed Black Flag is one of my favourite games in the series, but just like every other Assassin's Creed game, there's at least one flaw, and for me that would have to be the tailing missions. You see, the thing about Assassin's Creed is that the tailing missions have always been a thing, and they were pretty slow, but Black Flag took it to a whole new level of slow. Sometimes it could even take up to 10 minutes for just one single tailing mission. They followed the same basic formula. You would follow a target through a crowded area, or if it's a ship, it would be in the ocean, trying to stay as close enough to them so that they don't lose you, but not so close that they would spot you. And oh boy, don't even get me started on that one mission where you're tailing a little boat in the bayou. That might be one of the worst missions in the game, alongside finding James Kidd on the Assassin Island. Every time I saw the words tail the gods, tail the boat, or tail the man of war, or just tail something in general, I was instantly frustrated. I think I read somewhere that 20% of the missions in Black Flag are tailing missions. Do you know how ludicrous that is? If the game had less or no tailing missions at all, I genuinely think it would have been probably my favourite in the whole series. It's still an amazing game, just a little frustrating at times. Now for Assassin's Creed Rogue, and this was a confusing one. The thing about Rogue is that it was a game that wasn't anything major or groundbreaking. One thing that I did not like was the lack of innovativeness that Assassin's Creed Rogue had. This was because it felt like Assassin's Creed Black Flag 1.5 rather than a whole new game. The game reused a lot of the same mechanics and assets from Black Flag, and it did not really offer anything new or groundbreaking. It felt like a game that took everything from past Assassin's Creed games and threw it all together into this title, without adding anything exclusive. While the next generation consoles at that time received Assassin's Creed Unity, Rogue was exclusively released for Xbox 360 and PS3, providing Ubisoft a means to offer people on older systems a new game without really incurring any high costs, and you can somewhat sense that decision reflected in the game, with it being kind of identical to Black Flag but with a very noticeable smaller map. Considering that we play Rogue after Black Flag, I think it's the wrong decision. This game should have came after Unity with Unity's engine. That's what would have made more sense in my opinion. Here is a game that's a mix of emotions. A game that has the best parkour in the entire series. One of the best looking worlds and overall setting of an Assassin's Creed game too. But there's always one problem with Ubisoft. They can make such a great world and parkour system, but they'll mess it up somehow with the story, and that's what I dislike the most about this game. Now for me, I really like Unity and everything about it, but that story was not it. If I made this type of video in 2014 when the game was released, I'd have 1000% said the thing I disliked the most would be the glitches and the bugs. But fast forward to 2023 and that's not even on my mind anymore. The plot of Unity was very predictable and there was no real surprises or twists. The French Revolution was one of the most important historical events in Europe and it had the potential to be a truly great story in the Assassin's Creed universe. However, the game's developers failed to live up to this potential. The love story between Arnaud Dorian and Elise Dallassé is predictable. It didn't really add anything to the story and it actually detracted from it. The game would have been much better if it had focused on the revolution and its events. I do understand that the developers wanted to tell a love story, but they should have done this in a way that did not detract from the main story. They could have, for example, told a love story through side quests or DLC. Assassin's Creed Syndicate was a game that was pretty overhated in my opinion. Mainly because of the main protagonist having somewhat of a sibling connection, and people did not really like that for some strange reason. But I for one actually enjoyed it. My biggest dislike however in Syndicate was the gang territories. I could have easily said quite a few other things, but this one for me was the main one. At first I actually enjoyed the gang territories. The idea of taking over London boroughs by defeating the Blighters was a pretty fun one. However, I quickly began to dislike them for a number of reasons, the main one being how goddamn repetitive it was. It was the same thing over and over, and for some strange reason, the gang territories could be really close to each other, like 15 seconds away. The enemies were damage sponges, and this was a massive problem because of how tanky they were, especially the big blighters. It took a lot of hits to take them down. This made the combat feel a bit slow and tedious, and it took away the sense of satisfaction that I got from defeating them because all I was doing was just spamming the attack button over and over. After a while I stopped going for the territories altogether. They were simply not fun enough for engaging for me to continue taking them down. I think the gang territories had the potential to be a great thing for Syndicate, but Ubisoft failed to execute it in any way that was engaging. Now I'll be honest here, this game to me is by far my favourite one in the entire series, so I'm probably gonna be a bit biased when I talk about it. In a game that's so great, it's hard to find any dislikes for me, but it has to be done. And if I was to nitpick one thing I disliked from Assassin's Creed Origins, it would have to be not being able to play as Aya more. Now I enjoyed Bayek and Aya's relationship throughout the story of Origins, and unlike Arnaud and Elise's relationship, Bayek and Aya's relationship was meaningful and made an impact on the entirety of the assassins, as they both did form the hidden ones that we know of. But I would have loved to play as Aya more in the game. We only got to play with her a little bit during ship battles and a Julius Caesar scene, but that was pretty much it. I do wish it was a similar case of Evie and Jacob from Assassin's Creed Syndicate, where we'd be able to switch between two characters at any point. It definitely would have made the game go from a 10 out of 10 to an 11 out of 10. Crazy improvement, right? Yeah, sorry, I did say that I would be biased about this game. Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Now this is a game that a lot of people don't really like, and I can see where they're coming from. But personally, I actually enjoyed this game a lot. Ubisoft nailed the whole Greek atmosphere down perfectly, but if I was to give one thing that I disliked about the game, well, my answer would be something you wouldn't really expect. You see, the common answer would be the bloated world and the damage sponge enemies. But I'm gonna go ahead and say it's the big reveal of the cult of Cosmos. Now spoiler warning in 3, 2, 1. Aspasia for me was the biggest letdown in the game. Even during the earlier stages in the game, it was kind of obvious that she would be the leader. The game did not really do a good job of hiding it. I mean, the biggest giveaway was the fact that her silhouette in the Cult of Cosmos menu screen literally shows that it's a woman. And during the game, the only two female characters that would make sense would be our own mother and Aspasia. In 5 years from now, if you ask me who is Aspasia, I would not have a clue, because that's how forgettable she was. Imagine instead of Aspasia, the leader of the cult could have been Marcos, a person who we've known since we were kids, and the man that raised us. That would have been miles better than Aspasia. So yeah, that's my biggest dislike about Odyssey. Oh boy, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now, if you're a regular viewer on my channel, you'd know that I'm not the biggest fan of this game. I made a video talking about how it was a game of wasted potential. I even put it quite low in my ranking settings video, and if that wasn't enough, I even put Eivor dead last in my ranking protagonist video. So yeah, if you can't tell by now, I'm not the biggest fan of Valhalla. But if I was to choose one particular thing that I dislike about the game, other than the game itself, it would definitely be the length of the story. Now, the length is quite long, just like Odyssey, but it's different in Valhalla. The story itself did not need to drag out that long. There were so many times where we'd need to go to a specific reason and do the pointless stuff inside of it to just advance the story. It was so dull, especially considering how boring the world was. The story itself should have been around 25 to 30 hours long. But they dragged it so much that it eventually felt like it was over 80 to 90 hours or so. The whole Fine Sigurd thing was also very tedious, as it made any type of character development for Eivor be overshadowed. That's why I always say it's a game of wasted potential. It has the graphics, the combat, and the right time period, but the way Ubisoft executed it was really poor. So there you have it, one thing that I disliked from every mainline Assassin's Creed game. Of course, everybody will have different opinions on things that people would dislike, but for me, this is what I went with. I'll definitely make a complete opposite video of this, where I give one thing I loved about every Assassin's Creed game, so be on the lookout for that. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more Assassin's Creed content, just hit that subscribe button and I'll see you in the next one.